I am Isabelle Romano, 28 years old, and standing beside my new husband at what should be the happiest moment of my life, watching my brother destroy everything with four cruel words. Ethan had just taken the microphone during the reception toasts at Silverbrook Estate, looked directly at me in my wedding dress, and announced to our 200 guests, "She's not really family anyway." The elegant ballroom fell into stunned silence as Alexander's hand tightened around mine. Just as I felt my legs give way beneath me, my maid of honor Vivian Clarke stood up from the head table, her emerald bridesmaid dress catching the chandelier light, and walked determinedly toward the microphone with a look I'd never seen before. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal chandeliers of Silverbrook Estate cast a warm glow over what had been, until 30 seconds ago, the perfect wedding reception. The venue was everything Alexander and I had dreamed of: exposed brick walls draped in ivory silk, towering windows overlooking the Tennessee hills, and round tables adorned with cascading white roses and eucalyptus. Our guests, a mix of family, college friends, and colleagues from Creative Minds marketing agency, had been laughing and celebrating just moments before. Now they sat frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, uncertain whether they had heard correctly. I had spent 18 months planning this day down to the smallest detail. The dress, a stunning A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves, had been my dream dress since I was 12. The menu featured Southern comfort food elevated to fine dining standards. Even the playlist had been carefully curated to include songs meaningful to Alexander and me, along with classics that would get everyone dancing. Everything had been perfect until my brother opened his mouth. Ethan stood at the microphone looking smugly satisfied, his black tuxedo impeccable, his dark hair styled with the same precision he applied to everything in his life. At 30, my older brother had inherited our father's commanding presence and our mother's sharp cheekbones. He looked every inch the successful investment banker he had become, but in that moment, his handsome features were twisted with a cruelty I'd experienced privately my entire life, now displayed for everyone to witness. The silence stretched impossibly long. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, drowning out the soft jazz music that continued playing through the sound system. Alexander's grip on my hand was the only thing keeping me upright as I felt my blood drain from my face. Around us, guests began shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some whispering behind their hands, others staring down at their plates in embarrassment. My parents, David and Patricia Romano, sat at the family table looking mortified. Mom's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, her hand pressed against her chest as if she couldn't breathe. Dad's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitching from across the room, but neither of them stood up. Neither of them defended me. They just sat there paralyzed by their own complicity in the secret Ethan had just weaponized against me. My new mother-in-law, Helen Hayes, looked confused and concerned, clearly not understanding the full implications of Ethan's statement, but recognizing its cruelty. Alexander's father, Judge William Hayes, had the stern expression he typically reserved for his courtroom, his disapproval evident even from a distance. The contrast between the two families' reactions was stark. The Hayes family looked ready to defend me, while my own family sat in stunned, guilty silence. I tried to speak, to find some words that might salvage the situation, but my throat had closed completely. This was supposed to be the day when I finally felt like I truly belonged somewhere, when I officially became part of Alexander's loving, accepting family. Instead, I was being publicly reminded that I had never truly belonged to the family that raised me. The wedding photographer, a sweet woman named Carol, who had captured so many beautiful moments throughout the day, had stopped taking pictures entirely. Even the catering staff had frozen in place, unsure whether to continue serving dessert or retreat to the kitchen. The entire celebration had ground to a halt, suspended in the awful aftermath of Ethan's declaration. That's when I saw Vivian rise from her seat at the head table. My best friend since college, the woman who had stood by my side through every challenge over the past decade, moved with purpose across the dance floor. Her long auburn hair was still perfectly styled from the ceremony, her makeup flawless despite the emotional day, but there was something different about her expression, something determined and almost knowing. Vivian and I had met during freshman orientation at Vanderbilt University, bonding over late-night study sessions and dreams of changing the world through marketing and communications. She had been my rock through every family disappointment, every moment when I felt like I didn't quite fit. She had celebrated my successes when my own family couldn't be bothered, and she had held me while I cried over their countless rejections. If anyone understood how deeply Ethan's words had just cut me, it was Vivian. But as she approached the microphone where Ethan still stood with that satisfied smirk, I realized there was something in her expression I couldn't quite identify. She looked angry, yes, but also prepared, as if she had been waiting for this moment, planning for it, even. The ballroom remained eerily quiet, except for the soft click of Vivian's heels against the hardwood floor and the distant sounds of traffic from downtown Nashville. Even the string quartet we had hired had stopped playing, their instruments lowered as they watched the drama unfold. Some guests had begun pulling out their phones, though whether to leave or document the spectacle, I couldn't tell. Ethan finally seemed to realize that his moment of triumph might be about to be challenged. His smirk faltered slightly as Vivian approached, but he made no move to step away from the microphone. Perhaps he thought she would simply try to smooth things over, make some diplomatic statement about family love and moving forward. He had no idea what was coming. Alexander leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Whatever happens next, you're my wife now. You're a Hayes. You belong with us." His words were meant to comfort, but they also highlighted the painful reality. I was 28 years old and had never felt like I truly belonged anywhere until I met him. As Vivian approached the microphone where Ethan still stood with that satisfied smirk, I realized there was something in her expression I couldn't quite identify. She looked angry, yes, but also prepared, as if she had been waiting for this moment, planning for it even. The ballroom remained eerily quiet except for the soft click of Vivian's heels against the hardwood floor and the distant sounds of traffic from downtown Nashville. Even the string quartet we had hired had stopped playing, their instruments lowered as they watched the drama unfold. Some guests had begun pulling out their phones, though whether to leave or document the spectacle, I couldn't tell. Vivian finally seemed to realize that his moment of triumph might be about to be challenged. His smirk faltered slightly as Vivian approached, but he made no move to step away from the microphone. Perhaps he thought she would simply try to smooth things over, make some diplomatic statement about family love and moving forward. He had no idea what was coming. The woman who had been my maid of honor, my college roommate, my closest confidant, was about to speak. And somehow I knew that whatever she said next would change everything. To understand the devastating power of Ethan's words that night, you need to know the story of how I became a Romano and how I never truly felt like one. I was 5 years old when David and Patricia Romano adopted me from the Tennessee Children's Home, a bright-eyed little girl who believed that finally having a family meant I would never feel alone again. I was wrong. My earliest memory as a Romano wasn't of warmth or welcome, but of confusion. It was my first Christmas with them, 1999, and I remember sitting cross-legged on their living room carpet in our Brentwood home, surrounded by torn wrapping paper and expensive toys I didn't understand how to use. 8-year-old Ethan had received a new bicycle, red and shining, the kind every kid in the neighborhood would envy. I had received dolls and dress-up clothes, beautiful things that any 5-year-old would love, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything felt temporary, like I was playing house rather than actually living in one. What I remember most clearly was the way Patricia, I wasn't allowed to call her mom yet, that privilege had to be earned, kept taking pictures of Ethan with his new bike while barely glancing at me with my gifts. David spent the entire morning teaching Ethan how to adjust the seat and handle the gears, their heads bent together in the kind of intimate father-son moment I had dreamed about having myself. When I asked if I could learn too, David smiled absently and said, "Maybe next year, sweetheart, when you're bigger." Next year never came. There was always some reason why Ethan needed more attention, more investment, more of everything. The Romano family lived in a sprawling colonial house on Magnolia Lane, where every room was decorated with family photos that told the story of their life before me. Patricia was meticulous about displaying their history, photos of Ethan as a baby, toddler, young boy, images of David and Patricia on their honeymoon at various celebrations, building a life together. And then, suddenly, there I was in the pictures too, a small girl with dark curls and uncertain eyes, clearly inserted into a family narrative that had been complete without me. What struck me even as a child was how different I looked from them. The Romanos were fair-skinned with light brown hair and sharp, angular features. Ethan looked like a perfect blend of both parents, with David's strong jaw and Patricia's elegant cheekbones. I, on the other hand, had olive-toned skin, almost black hair, and softer, rounder features that marked me as obviously not their biological child. In family photos, I stood out like a beautiful anomaly, loved in theory, but never quite fitting the visual story they wanted to tell. School events were particularly painful. Parent-teacher conferences, school plays, graduation ceremonies, any occasion where families gathered and comparisons were inevitable. I watched other kids run to their parents after performances, seeing instant recognition and pride in familiar faces. When I looked into the audience, I would find David and Patricia clapping politely, but their enthusiasm was always reserved for Ethan's achievements, even when mine were objectively more impressive. I was a straight-A student from elementary school through high school, consistently on the honor roll, involved in debate team, student council, and volunteer work. Ethan was a B and C student who coasted through his classes and spent most of his time playing video games or hanging out with friends. Yet somehow, family conversations always centered around his potential, his future, his needs. The summer I turned 12, I made the mistake of asking Patricia about my biological parents. We were in the kitchen preparing lunch. She was making Ethan's favorite grilled cheese sandwiches while I helped by setting the table when I worked up the courage to ask the question that had been haunting me for years. "Mom," I said, testing out the word I had finally been allowed to use, "can you tell me about my real parents? Why they couldn't keep me?" Patricia's reaction was swift and sharp. She set down the spatula and turned to face me, her expression cold in a way I had rarely seen directed at me so directly. "We are your real parents, Isabelle. David and I chose you, raised you, provided for you. Some people aren't capable of being parents, and that's all you need to know about your situation before you came to us. I don't want to hear you asking about this again." The conversation was over, but the damage was done. Not only had I learned that my questions about my origins were unwelcome, but I had also been reminded that my place in this family was contingent on gratitude and good behavior. I was there because they had chosen me, not because I belonged by right of birth like Ethan did. This dynamic played out in countless small ways throughout my childhood. When I brought home art projects from school, Patricia would glance at them briefly before tucking them into a drawer, while Ethan's much less impressive creations were immediately hung on the refrigerator. When I asked to take piano lessons like several of my friends, David said it was too expensive, but somehow they found the money for Ethan's baseball equipment and summer camps. The most painful example came when I was 14. I had been working for months on a science fair project about renewable energy, spending every free moment researching and building a working model of a solar-powered water purification system. It was innovative, well-researched, and beautifully presented. I won first place at the regional level and qualified for the state competition, a huge achievement for a freshman. That same week, Ethan made the JV basketball team as a sophomore, which was fairly typical since he was tall for his age, but not particularly athletic. The dinner conversation the night I brought home my science fair trophy focused entirely on Ethan's basketball schedule, the equipment he would need, and how proud they were of his athletic achievement. My state-level qualification was mentioned briefly, almost as an afterthought. "That's nice, honey," Patricia said when I showed them my trophy. "You've always been good at school projects. Ethan, we need to get your physical scheduled for basketball." It was then that I began to understand the fundamental difference in how they saw us. Ethan's achievements, no matter how modest, were treated as natural expressions of Romano excellence. My achievements, no matter how exceptional, were seen as nice surprises from their adopted daughter, pleasant but not particularly meaningful to the family legacy. The isolation I felt wasn't just about academic recognition. It was about belonging, about feeling seen and valued for who I was, rather than being appreciated for my gratitude. I learned to celebrate my own victories quietly and to expect nothing in the way of emotional investment from the people who were supposed to be my biggest supporters. By the time I was 16, I had stopped expecting equity and had begun working toward independence. I took a part-time job at a local bookstore, started saving money for college, and began making plans for a future where my worth wouldn't be determined by comparison to Ethan or the circumstances of my adoption. I loved the Romano family because they were the only family I had known, but I also understood that their love for me would always be different, conditional, and secondary to their investment in their biological son. What I couldn't have known then was that there were secrets about my adoption that even I didn't understand. Secrets that would explain so much about why I never quite fit, and secrets that my best friend Vivian was about to reveal to a room full of wedding guests on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. High school should have been my chance to shine independently, away from the constant comparisons at home. Instead, it became 4 more years of watching Ethan receive credit for mediocrity while my genuine achievements were minimized or ignored entirely. The pattern that had begun in childhood only intensified as we both grew older and the stakes got higher. Junior year was when everything crystallized for me. I had been elected student body president, maintained a 4.0 GPA while taking advanced placement courses, and had just received early acceptance to Vanderbilt University with a partial academic scholarship. Ethan, meanwhile, was barely passing his senior year classes and had been rejected from 3 colleges already. You would think this might have been a moment when David and Patricia recognized that their assumptions about which child had the brighter future might need adjusting. Instead, the family dinner where I shared my Vanderbilt acceptance became entirely about helping Ethan find a college that would accept him despite his poor grades. Patricia spent the entire meal on her phone, calling her friends to ask about connections at various universities. David launched into a speech about how grades weren't everything and how Ethan's leadership potential and natural charisma would take him far in life. "Congratulations on Vanderbilt, sweetheart," Patricia said absently, barely looking up from her phone. "That's wonderful. David, what about your colleague whose son goes to Middle Tennessee State? Maybe they have rolling admissions." I sat there with my acceptance letter in hand, the scholarship offer that would make my parents' financial contribution minimal, and realized that this moment, which should have been one of the proudest in our family's history, was being treated as a minor interruption to the real crisis of getting Ethan into any college at all. The scholarship was particularly significant because money had always been an issue when it came to my activities and opportunities. Throughout high school, I had been told repeatedly that dance lessons, art classes, and even school trips were too expensive. Yet Ethan's baseball equipment, his car insurance after he got his license, and his social activities never seemed to strain the family budget in the same way. When I asked if I could attend a summer journalism program at Northwestern University the summer before my senior year, a program that would have looked incredible on college applications, David shook his head immediately. Izzy, that's $3,000 for 2 weeks. We just can't justify that kind of expense for something that's essentially a hobby. 2 months later, they paid $4,000 for Ethan to attend a basketball camp in Florida, despite the fact that he had already been cut from the varsity team and had no realistic prospects of playing college athletics. When I pointed out the discrepancy, Patricia's response was telling. Basketball could be Ethan's ticket to college. We have to invest in his future. The implication was clear. My future was already secure because I was academically gifted, so I didn't need their investment. Ethan's future was uncertain, so he deserved their financial and emotional resources. It was a twisted logic that penalized me for being self-sufficient while rewarding him for being dependent. The college application process revealed even deeper inequities. While I researched schools, wrote essays, and managed my entire application process independently, David and Patricia hired a private college counselor for Ethan at $800 per hour. They drove him to campus visits across 3 states, scheduled meetings with admissions officers, and even had Patricia's sorority sister write a recommendation letter, despite barely knowing him. I applied to Vanderbilt, Emory, University of Tennessee, and Duke, handling every aspect of the process myself while working 20 hours a week at the bookstore to save money for application fees. When I received acceptances from all 4 schools, including scholarship offers from 3 of them, the family celebration lasted approximately 5 minutes before shifting to concern about whether Ethan would get into any of the schools on his list. "We're very proud of you, Isabelle," David said, giving me a brief hug. "You've always been so independent and capable. Now, Ethan, let's talk about your essay for Austin Pay. I think if we emphasize your volunteer work at the church..."
The volunteer work at the church consisted of helping set up chairs for events twice over the course of 2 years. But it was being crafted into evidence of Ethan's servant leadership and community commitment. Senior year brought the culmination of these patterns in ways that were both predictable and heartbreaking. I was named valedictorian, received the school's highest academic honor, and was accepted into Vanderbilt's competitive business program. Ethan graduated with a 2.1 GPA and was accepted to Middle Tennessee State University on academic probation. At graduation, sitting in the auditorium watching our names called, I experienced a moment of clarity about my place in the Romano family hierarchy. When Ethan's name was announced, David and Patricia stood up, cheered loudly, and Patricia actually teared up with pride. When my name was called as valedictorian and I walked across the stage to give the graduation speech I had worked on for weeks, they clapped politely and remained seated. After the ceremony, extended family members approached to congratulate me on my speech and academic achievements. Uncle Frank, David's brother, pulled me aside and said something that has stuck with me to this day. "Izzy, I want you to know that everyone sees how hard you work and how much you've accomplished," he said quietly. "Your parents, they love you, but they don't always know how to show it. Sometimes people get so focused on helping the child who struggles that they forget to celebrate the child who succeeds." It was the closest anyone in the family had ever come to acknowledging the disparity in how Ethan and I were treated. But even Uncle Frank's kindness highlighted the fundamental problem. My achievements were seen as something that happened naturally, requiring no support or recognition, while Ethan's struggles were viewed as family emergencies, requiring all available resources and attention. The summer before college was when I began to understand that this pattern would likely continue indefinitely unless I created boundaries. I worked full-time at the bookstore, saved every penny for college expenses, and spent my free time reading everything I could about marketing and communications. I had decided to major in business with a focus on marketing, partly because I was genuinely interested in how brands build emotional connections with consumers, and partly because I knew it was a field where my success would be measurable and undeniable. Ethan spent that same summer sleeping until noon, playing video games, and asking our parents for spending money despite not having a job. The contrast was so stark that even some of their friends began to notice and comment, though always diplomatically. Izzy is such a self-starter, family friend Mrs. Henderson observes at a backyard barbecue. You must be so proud of how independent she is. We are, Patricia replied automatically. She's always been mature for her age. Ethan is more of our free spirit. He needs more guidance finding his path. Free spirit. That was how they framed his lack of direction and responsibility. Meanwhile, my independence and maturity were treated as innate qualities that required no nurturing or acknowledgement. When August came and it was time to leave for college, the send-off reflected everything about our family dynamics. For Ethan's departure to MTSU, David and Patricia drove him to campus, helped him move into his dorm room, took him shopping for everything he had forgotten to pack, and stayed for the entire parent orientation weekend. For my departure to Vanderbilt, they drove me to campus, helped me carry my belongings to my dorm room, and left within 2 hours because they had dinner plans back in Nashville. No shopping trip, no parent orientation, no lingering goodbye. Just a quick hug and a reminder to call if I needed anything, followed by their assumption that I would handle everything else on my own. Standing in my empty dorm room that first day, watching other families taking photos and sharing emotional farewells, I made a promise to myself I would build a life where my worth wasn't determined by comparison to Ethan or by my status as the adopted child who should be grateful for whatever attention she received. I would find my own family, people who celebrated my successes instead of taking them for granted. What I couldn't have predicted was that one of those people, the person who would become my closest friend and strongest advocate, was about to walk into my life in the most unexpected way.
Freshman orientation at Vanderbilt University in August 2014 was a whirlwind of activities designed to help 18-year-olds find their place in a new world. I had been assigned to Fleming Hall, a traditional dorm known for housing serious students, and I was determined to make the most of every opportunity college offered. After years of feeling invisible at home, I was ready to create an identity based entirely on my own merits. The first person I met was my roommate, Sarah, a pre-med student from Memphis who seemed as focused and driven as I was. We got along well enough, but it was clear from day one that we would be friendly roommates rather than close friends. Sarah spent most of her time studying or with other pre-med students, leaving me to navigate the social landscape on my own. It was during a freshman mixer in the student center that I first saw Vivian Clarke. She was holding court at a table near the windows, surrounded by a diverse group of students who were all laughing at something she had said. What struck me immediately was how confident she seemed. Not in the performative way some people project confidence, but with a genuine ease that made everyone around her feel comfortable. Vivian was tall and striking, with auburn hair that caught the light and green eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She was wearing a simple sundress and sandals, but she carried herself like she was dressed for a magazine cover. More importantly, when she laughed, it was the kind of genuine, infectious laughter that made you want to be part of whatever conversation had sparked it. I was standing alone near the refreshment table, holding a cup of punch and watching the various social groups form, when Vivian appeared beside me. "You look like you're conducting anthropological research on college social dynamics," she said with a grin. "I'm Vivian Clarke, and I'm absolutely terrible at these forced socialization events." "Isabelle Romano," I replied, surprised by her directness. And I was thinking the same thing. It's like watching people audition for friendship. Exactly! Vivian's eyes lit up. Everyone's trying so hard to be impressive that they're forgetting to be interesting. What's your major? That conversation lasted 2 hours. We talked about everything. Our intended majors, business for me, communications for her, our families. I kept the details vague. She was refreshingly honest about her parents' divorce, our goals for college, and our shared love of true crime podcasts. By the time the mixer was winding down, we had made plans to grab lunch the next day. What I discovered over the following weeks was that Vivian had an unusual background that made her remarkably mature for 18. She had grown up in Atlanta with her mother after her parents' messy divorce when she was 12. Her father, a successful attorney, had largely disappeared from her life after the divorce, leaving her mother to raise her alone while building a career as a social worker. I learned early that you can't depend on people just because they're supposed to love you. But when you find people who choose to be in your life and show up consistently, those relationships are worth everything. Her words resonated with me in a way that was both comforting and painful. She understood something about conditional love and chosen family that most of our peers couldn't grasp. It was the beginning of a friendship that would become the most important relationship in my life. By October, Vivian and I were inseparable. We studied together, we explored Nashville together, and spent hours talking about our dreams and fears. She was pursuing communications with a focus on public relations, while I was diving deep into marketing and consumer psychology. We complemented each other perfectly. She was naturally outgoing and intuitive about people, while I was analytical and strategic. More importantly, Vivian celebrated my successes in a way my family never had. When I aced my first marketing exam, she insisted we go out for ice cream to celebrate. When I was selected for a competitive business program that would start sophomore year, she bought a bottle of champagne, illegally since we were both under 21, and we toasted in our dorm room. You realize you're brilliant, right? Like, scary brilliant. You're going to run companies someday. Her confidence in me was intoxicating because it felt so genuine. This wasn't someone trying to make me feel better or offering empty encouragement. Vivian saw my potential clearly and reflected it back to me in a way that made me start to believe it myself. The contrast with my family became even starker during that first year. When I called home with news about my academic achievements or campus leadership opportunities, the conversations were brief and distracted. David and Patricia were dealing with Ethan's struggles at MTSU. He was failing 2 classes, had been written up for drinking violations in his dorm, and was considering dropping out after just 1 semester. "That's wonderful, honey," Patricia would say when I shared good news. "Listen, we're really worried about your brother. He's having a hard time adjusting to college life. Maybe you could call him and give him some advice about time management." Even from 150 miles away, I was expected to manage Ethan's problems while my own achievements went largely unnoticed. Vivian witnessed several of these phone calls and began to understand the family dynamics I had been too embarrassed to fully explain. "Your family doesn't deserve you," she said after overhearing a particularly frustrating conversation, or I spent 30 minutes listening to Patricia worry about Ethan's grades while my own Dean's List achievement went unmentioned. "They take you for granted because you make everything look easy, but that doesn't mean it is easy." Spring semester brought new opportunities and deeper friendship with Vivian. We both joined the Student Marketing Association and began working on campaigns for local businesses. Our partnership was natural and effective. I handled strategy and analysis, while she managed client relationships and presentations. Professors began to notice our work, and by the end of freshman year, we had both been offered research assistant positions with the business school. It was also during spring semester that I began to understand there was something mysterious about Vivian's interest in me. She asked detailed questions about my adoption that went beyond casual curiosity. She wanted to know the name of the children's home, the exact date I had been adopted, whether I had any information about my biological parents. At first, I assumed she was just being supportive. Maybe she thought I should try to learn more about my origins. But there were other small things. She seemed to know Nashville better than most Atlanta natives would. She had strong opinions about certain neighborhoods and restaurants, as if she had personal experience with them. When I mentioned the Romano family business, David owned a small chain of sporting goods stores, she asked specific questions about locations and history that seemed unusually informed. "Have you ever thought about hiring a private investigator to find out more about your biological family?" she asked one evening as we walked across campus after studying. Not really, I replied honestly. The Romanos made it clear that asking questions about my past wasn't welcome, and I'm not sure I want to open that door. What if my biological parents didn't want me for good reasons? Vivian stopped walking and turned to face me. What if they did want you, but circumstances made it impossible? What if there's more to your story than you know? Her intensity in that moment struck me as odd, but I attributed it to her natural empathy and her own experience with family complexity. I had no idea that Vivian wasn't just asking hypothetical questions. She was preparing to reveal secrets that would change everything I thought I knew about my identity and my place in the world. By the end of freshman year, our friendship had become the most important relationship in my life. Vivian was the sister I had never had, the family member who saw my worth and celebrated my potential. When we made plans to room together sophomore year, I felt like I was finally building the chosen family I had dreamed of. What I didn't know was that our connection ran much deeper than friendship, and that the truth about who Vivian really was would eventually reshape everything I understood about my past, my present, and my future. Fast forward 10 years from that freshman orientation, and Vivian had become more than my best friend. She was my chosen sister, my business partner at Creative Minds marketing agency, and the person I trusted more than anyone in the world. So when Alexander Hayes proposed to me on Christmas Eve 2023 with his grandmother's vintage engagement ring, Vivian was the first person I called, even before my parents. "He did it!" I screamed into the phone, barely coherent with excitement. "Alex proposed! I'm engaged!" Vivian's response was everything I could have hoped for. Pure joy, immediate planning mode, and the kind of enthusiastic celebration that made the moment feel even more magical. "I'm coming over right now with champagne," she declared. "We have a wedding to plan." What should have been the happiest year of my life, however, became a masterclass in family dysfunction as wedding planning revealed every painful dynamic I had hoped might have improved over the years. The problems began almost immediately after Alexander and I announced our engagement to both families. The Hayes family response was everything I had dreamed of. Helen, Alexander's mother, immediately welcomed me with tears of joy and began talking about how excited she was to officially have a daughter. Judge William Hayes, typically reserved but deeply kind, pulled me aside to tell me how proud he was to have me joining their family. Alexander's sister Emma started a group chat about bridesmaid dress shopping before I had even asked her to be in the wedding party. The Romano family response was different. "Engaged?" Patricia repeated when Alexander and I shared our news at Sunday dinner in January. "Well, that's, sudden. How long have you two been dating? 2 years?" "3 years, Mom," I corrected gently. "You've met Alexander dozens of times." Of course, she said quickly, but I could see her calculating something in her head. "And his father is, what does his father do again?" "Dad's a federal judge," Alexander replied, politely, though I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "And Mom's a pediatric nurse practitioner." David perked up at this. Finally, something impressive enough to warrant his attention. "A federal judge? That's excellent, Alexander. Very respectable family." The message was clear. I had managed to marry up, which reflected well on them, but the engagement itself wasn't particularly noteworthy. Meanwhile, Ethan sat silently at the end of the table, picking at his food with an expression I couldn't quite read. Wedding planning became a battleground almost immediately. Alexander and I had envisioned an elegant but intimate celebration, about 200 guests at a beautiful venue, focusing on family and close friends rather than a massive social event. We wanted something that reflected our values, meaningful, sophisticated, but not ostentatious. The first conflict arose over the guest list. Patricia immediately began adding names of people I barely knew: distant relatives, her book club friends, business associates of David's, while questioning every person I wanted to invite. Do we really need to invite all of your college friends? She asked during our second wedding planning meeting. Some of these people you haven't seen in years. Actually, Mom, I keep in touch with most of them regularly. These are the people who have been part of my life and supported me through everything. Well, the venue has capacity limits, she said dismissively. We need to prioritize family and important connections. Meanwhile, Ethan had been given carte blanche to invite anyone he wanted, including friends of his that I had never met, and some of his fraternity brothers from college who had been openly rude to me in the past. The next battle was over the wedding budget. Alexander and I had planned to pay for most of the wedding ourselves, with both families contributing what they felt comfortable with. The Hayes family offered a generous contribution with no strings attached, simply asking if there was anything specific they could handle, like the rehearsal dinner or flowers. The Romano family's contribution came with a list of requirements. They wanted control over the catering menu, the band selection, and most frustratingly, they wanted Ethan to give a speech as head of the Romano family since David wasn't comfortable with public speaking. Izzy, you have to understand, Patricia explained when I objected to this arrangement. Ethan is the family spokesperson. He's always been better with words than your father. This was news to me, since Ethan had never shown any particular eloquence or public speaking ability, but apparently his role as family representative was now being established for my wedding. The dress shopping experience epitomized everything wrong with the family dynamic. I had planned a special day with Patricia, Vivian, and Alexander's mother, Helen. I had made appointments at 2 boutiques in Nashville and arranged for lunch at a nice restaurant afterward. From the moment we walked into the first bridal salon, Patricia took control. She immediately began pulling dresses that reflected her taste rather than mine. Heavily beaded gowns with dramatic trains that were beautiful but completely wrong for my style and the venue we had chosen. "This is gorgeous," she declared, holding up a dress that cost more than my monthly rent. Very traditional, very bridal. Meanwhile, Vivian and Helen were quietly selecting dresses that actually reflected my personality. Elegant, sophisticated pieces with clean lines and subtle details. When I emerged from the fitting room wearing a stunning A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves that made me feel like the best version of myself, Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Izzy, you look absolutely radiant," she said softly. "That dress is perfect for you." Vivian nodded enthusiastically. "That's it. That's your dress. You look like a bride, but you still look like you." Patricia's response was immediate and cutting. "It's very simple. Are you sure you don't want something more substantial? This is your wedding day, not a cocktail party." The word substantial hung in the air like an accusation. The implication was clear. I wasn't substantial enough to warrant a more elaborate dress. Or perhaps I wasn't enough of a Romano to deserve their definition of a proper wedding dress. I bought the dress I loved, but the experience left me feeling deflated rather than excited. Even dress shopping, one of the moments every bride dreams of, had become another opportunity for Patricia to remind me that my choices weren't quite right, weren't quite enough. The venue selection brought more of the same. Alexander and I had fallen in love with Silverbrook Estate, a historic property with stunning gardens and an elegant ballroom that perfectly matched our vision. The price was reasonable, the staff was professional, and the setting was everything we had dreamed of. "It's very rustic," was Patricia's assessment after our venue tour. "Are you sure you wouldn't prefer something more formal? The Hermitage Hotel has a beautiful ballroom." The Hermitage Hotel was also twice as expensive and completely wrong for what we wanted. But it was the kind of venue that would impress her friends and reflect the image she wanted to project. Meanwhile, Alexander had begun making comments about the wedding that revealed his true feelings about my upcoming marriage. During a family dinner 6 months before the wedding, he made a joke that stopped conversation cold. "Well, at least somebody in the family is finally settling down. Though I guess Alex doesn't know what he's getting into, marrying into our crazy family." "Ethan," David warned, but there was no real heat in it. What? It's true, he continued, warming to his theme. Alex seems like a nice guy. Too bad he's about to discover that Romano women come with a lot of baggage. The comment was ostensibly about both Patricia and me, but his eyes were fixed on me when he said it. Alexander, to his credit, responded immediately. I'm marrying Izzy because she's extraordinary. I consider myself the luckiest man alive, and I'm honored to become part of both of our families. It was a perfect response that shut down Ethan's attempt at humor while making it clear that Alexander wouldn't tolerate disrespect toward me. But the damage was done. Ethan had revealed his fundamental resentment about my happiness and success. As the wedding date approached, these small conflicts and cutting remarks began to accumulate into a larger pattern that Vivian noticed and began documenting. She had always been protective of me, but during wedding planning, her protective instincts went into overdrive. This isn't normal family teasing, she told me after witnessing a particularly painful exchange where Patricia criticized my choice of flowers. This is systematic undermining. They're trying to make you feel like you don't deserve this happiness. I wanted to dismiss her concerns, to believe that my family's behavior stemmed from wedding stress rather than deeper issues. But as the wedding date grew closer and the comments became more pointed, I began to realize that Vivian was right. My family wasn't just being difficult about wedding planning, they were actively working to diminish what should have been the happiest time of my life. What I couldn't have predicted was that their resentment would culminate in Ethan's public humiliation at the reception, or that Vivian's years of watching this dynamic play out would finally motivate her to reveal secrets that would change everything I thought I knew about my place in the Romano family. October 12th, 2024 dawned crisp and clear in Nashville, with golden autumn light filtering through the trees at Silverbrook Estate. It was the perfect day I had dreamed of, and as I woke up in the bridal suite, surrounded by my bridesmaids, I felt a surge of pure happiness that I was determined not to let anyone diminish. Vivian had insisted on booking the bridal suite for the night before the wedding so we could all get ready together without any family drama interfering with the morning preparations. She had thought of everything: champagne for mimosas, a beautiful breakfast spread from my favorite local bakery, and a carefully curated playlist of songs that made me feel confident and radiant. Today is your day, she announced as she handed me a mimosa and a crystal flute. Today, you marry the love of your life, you look absolutely stunning, and nothing, and I mean nothing, is going to diminish this moment. Emma Hayes, Alexander's sister, who had become like a real sister to me, raised her glass in agreement. To Izzy, who deserves every bit of happiness coming her way. My other bridesmaids, college friends who had flown in from across the country, cheered and toasted, creating the warm, supportive atmosphere I had always wanted for my wedding morning. For a few precious hours, surrounded by women who genuinely celebrated me, I felt like the most loved bride in the world. The mood began to shift when Patricia arrived for hair and makeup. She swept into the bridal suite wearing an elegant mother-of-the-bride dress in navy blue, but her expression was tensed rather than joyful. "Isabelle, we need to talk about the seating arrangements," she said immediately, bypassing any warm greetings or acknowledgement of how beautiful the day was. "Your father is concerned about where we've placed some of the business associates." I was sitting in the makeup chair, trying to enjoy the process of being pampered when this conversation started. "Mom, we finalized the seating chart 2 weeks ago. Everything's been confirmed with the venue." "Well, things change," Patricia replied curtly. "Ethan thinks we should move the Johnson family closer to the head table since David is hoping to do business with them." Vivian, who was getting her hair touched up nearby, caught my eye in the mirror. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She had been anticipating this kind of last-minute family interference. "The seating chart is final," I said as gently but firmly as I could. "The venue staff has already set up according to our plan." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "I just think you should consider family priorities on your wedding day." "I am considering family priorities," I replied, meeting her eyes in the mirror. That's why Alexander's grandparents are at the head table and why both of our immediate families have the best seats in the house. The hairstylist and makeup artist exchanged uncomfortable glances as the tension in the room became palpable. Emma quietly moved to sit near me, a gesture of silent support that didn't go unnoticed. Speaking of family, Patricia continued, Ethan has prepared some remarks for his speech tonight. He's very excited to share some memories from your childhood. My stomach clenched. Ethan giving a speech had been one of their non-negotiable demands, despite my concerns about what he might say. What kind of memories? Oh, you know, funny stories about growing up together. He wants to make sure everyone understands what kind of family the Romanos are. The way she said it made me deeply uneasy. But there wasn't much I could do at this point except hope that Ethan would show some restraint on my wedding day. Vivian stood up abruptly. Mrs. Romano, would you mind if I stole Izzy for a few minutes? I want to give her something special before the ceremony. Patricia looked annoyed by the interruption, but couldn't really object. Vivian led me out onto the suite's private balcony, closing the door behind us. How are you really feeling? She asked, studying my face carefully. Nervous? I admitted. Not about marrying Alex. That's the easiest decision I've ever made. But about everything else. About what Ethan might say. About whether my family is going to find some way to make this day about their drama instead of our celebration.
Vivian was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the estate grounds where staff members were making final preparations for the ceremony. When she spoke, her voice was unusually serious. Izzy, I need you to know that whatever happens today, you have people who love you unconditionally, not because of what you do for them, not because you make them look good, but because of who you are as a person. Something in her tone caught my attention. Viv, is everything okay? You seem, I don't know, like you're preparing me for something. She turned to look at me directly, and I saw an expression I had never seen before. A mixture of love, determination, and something that looked almost like grief. I just want you to remember that the truth isn't always what we've been told, she said carefully. And sometimes the people who claim to love us aren't the ones who actually see our worth. Before I could ask what she meant, Emma appeared at the balcony door. Sorry to interrupt, but it's time to get into your dress. The next hour passed in a blur of final preparations. The dress fit perfectly, the makeup artist had created exactly the look I had wanted, and my hair was styled in an elegant updo that made me feel like a classical beauty. When I looked in the full-length mirror, I saw the bride I had always dreamed of becoming, radiant, confident, and ready to start the next chapter of my life. The ceremony itself was everything Alexander and I had hoped for. The outdoor setting was perfect, with golden October light filtering through the trees and creating a magical atmosphere. Our officiant, Alexander's family pastor, spoke beautifully about love, commitment, and building a life together based on mutual respect and shared values. When Alexander and I exchanged vows, I felt like we were the only two people in the world. His voice was steady and full of emotion as he promised to love, support, and cherish me for the rest of his life. My own vows came from the heart, expressing gratitude for finding someone who saw and celebrated the real me. The moment when we were pronounced husband and wife and shared our first kiss as married couple was pure magic. The applause from our guests felt genuinely celebratory, and as we walked back down the aisle together, I felt like I was floating. The receiving line after the ceremony gave me a chance to greet everyone personally, and the responses from Alexander's family and our friends were everything I could have hoped for. Warm hugs, tearful congratulations, and genuine expressions of joy for our happiness. When I reached my own family in the receiving line, the energy was noticeably different. David gave me a brief hug and said, "You look beautiful, sweetheart," but his attention seemed distracted. Patricia's embrace was equally brief, followed by immediate concerns about whether the reception timeline would run smoothly.
Ethan's greeting was the most unsettling. He hugged me and said, "Congratulations, sis." But there was something in his expression that made me uncomfortable, a satisfaction that seemed out of place, as if he was looking forward to something I wasn't aware of. As Alexander and I prepared to enter the reception, I pushed aside my concerns about my family's odd behavior. This was my wedding day, and I was married to the most wonderful man I had ever met. Whatever family drama might be brewing, surely they would set it aside for one evening to celebrate with us. I had no idea that Ethan was about to turn my wedding reception into the most humiliating experience of my life, or that Vivian was finally ready to reveal secrets that would explain everything I had never understood about my place in the Romano family.
The cocktail hour at Silverbrook Estate was magical. Alexander and I moved through our guests like we were floating, receiving congratulations and sharing in the joy that radiated from everyone around us. The estate's gardens provided the perfect backdrop for photos, and our photographer captured moments that looked like something from a fairy tale. Alexander spinning me around in my flowing dress, both of us laughing with pure happiness. The ballroom had been transformed into exactly what we had envisioned. Soft string lights twinkled overhead, creating a warm, intimate atmosphere despite the room's grandeur. Each table was adorned with low arrangements of white roses and eucalyptus, allowing guests to easily converse across the table. The head table, where the wedding party would sit, offered a perfect view of the entire room, and I felt a surge of pride seeing everything come together so beautifully. As we took our seats for dinner, I surveyed the room filled with people we loved. Alexander's family occupied several tables near the front, their faces glowing with happiness and acceptance. My college friends were clustered together, already laughing and reminiscing about our university days. Colleagues from Creative Minds Marketing Agency had traveled from across the region to celebrate with us, and I felt genuinely touched by the effort people had made to be there. The Romano family table was positioned prominently as tradition demanded. David looked distinguished in his black tuxedo, though he seemed uncomfortable with the formal atmosphere. Patricia was in her element, chatting with other guests and clearly enjoying her role as mother of the bride. But it was Ethan who drew my attention. He kept checking his phone, glancing at notes he had written on a small card, and looking around the room with an expression I couldn't quite read. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Dinner was served flawlessly. The catering staff Alexander and I had chosen were true professionals, and every course was perfectly prepared and beautifully presented. The conversation at our table was lively and warm, with my bridesmaids sharing funny stories about our college days and Alexander's groomsmen recounting tales from their friendship. Vivian, seated to my right as maid of honor, seemed more subdued than usual during dinner. She smiled and participated in conversations, but I caught her watching the Romano family table with an intensity that puzzled me. When I asked if everything was okay, she squeezed my hand and said, "Just taking it all in. You look so happy, Izzy." As the dinner plates were cleared and the evening moved toward the traditional toasts, I felt that familiar flutter of nervous anticipation. Wedding speeches could be unpredictable, and while I trusted Alexander's best man and Vivian completely, I had no idea what Ethan had prepared. The wedding coordinator approached our table to confirm the order of speeches. Alexander's best man would go first, followed by Vivian as maid of honor, then my father, and finally Ethan as representative of the Romano family. The title still made me uncomfortable, but at this point there was nothing to do but hope for the best. Alexander's best man, Marcus, took the microphone first and delivered exactly the kind of speech you hope for. Funny without being embarrassing, heartfelt without being overly sentimental, and full of genuine love for both Alexander and me. He shared stories about Alexander's devotion to me, about how much happier and more complete Alexander had become since we started dating, and about how obvious it was that we were meant to be together. To Alexander and Izzy, Marcus concluded, raising his champagne glass.
May your love continue to inspire everyone around you." The applause was warm and genuine, and I felt my nervousness begin to ease. Maybe this would go smoothly after all. Vivian stood up next, looking radiant in her emerald bridesmaid dress. But as she adjusted the microphone, I noticed her hands were trembling slightly, unusual for someone who had always been comfortable with public speaking. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice clear and confident, despite whatever nerves she might be feeling. "For those who don't know me, I'm Vivian Clarke, Izzy's maid of honor and best friend for the past 10 years. She spoke beautifully about our friendship, about watching me find true love with Alexander, and about the kind of person I was, loyal, generous, accomplished, and deserving of all the happiness in the world. What struck me was how specific she was about my character and achievements, as if she was deliberately establishing a record of my worth for everyone in the room.
Izzy has spent her whole life making everyone around her proud, Vivian said, looking directly at me. Tonight, I want her to know how proud we all are of her, not just for what she accomplishes, but for who she is as a person. Her speech was perfect, and the applause was enthusiastic, but as she handed the microphone to David, I caught something in her expression, a combination of love and determination that suggested her words had been chosen very carefully for reasons I didn't yet understand. David's speech was mercifully brief. He thanked everyone for coming, mentioned how proud he was to see me settled with such a fine man, and welcomed Alexander to the family. It was generic and safe, but at least it was positive. Then it was Ethan's turn. My brother stood up from the Romano family table with the confident swagger he had perfected over the years. At 32, he still carried himself like the golden child he had always been, but there was something different about his demeanor tonight, something that made several guests shift uncomfortably as he approached the microphone. "Thank you, David," Ethan said, taking the microphone with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ethan Romano, Izzy's older brother." He paused to survey the room, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. I felt Alexander's hand find mine under the table, squeezing gently in a gesture of support. "You know," Ethan continued, "people always ask me what it was like growing up with Izzy. And I have to tell you, it's been... interesting." A few people chuckled, assuming this was the beginning of typical sibling humor. But something in Ethan's tone made me feel sick to my stomach. See, Izzy has always been the overachiever in our family, always working so hard to prove herself, always trying to earn her place. The room grew quieter as guests began to sense that this wasn't going in a typical celebratory direction. "And I guess I understand why she felt like she had to work so hard," Ethan said, looking directly at me with a cruel smile. "After all, when you're not really family to begin with, you have to try a little harder to belong, don't you?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Several guests gasped audibly, and I felt the blood drain from my face. Alexander's grip on my hand tightened, and I could see his jaw clench with anger. But Ethan wasn't finished. He continued, apparently oblivious to the horrified expressions around the room. "I mean, let's be honest here. We all know Izzy was adopted, and while my parents have always tried to treat her like one of their own, at the end of the day," he shrugged with mock casualness, "she's not really family anyway." The ballroom fell into the kind of silence that follows a devastating accident, shocked, horrified, and complete. I sat frozen in my chair, unable to process what had just happened. My own brother had just publicly humiliated me at my wedding reception, reducing me to my adoption status in front of 200 people who had come to celebrate the happiest day of my life. Around the room, I could see people's reactions. Some guests looked away in embarrassment. Others stared at Ethan with open disgust. Alexander's family appeared shocked and angry, while several of my friends had tears in their eyes.
But it was Vivian's reaction that caught my attention. She wasn't looking shocked or devastated like everyone else. Instead, she was standing up from her seat with a look of absolute determination, her green eyes blazing with something that looked almost like relief, as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life.
Vivian moved across the ballroom floor with purpose, her emerald dress flowing behind her as she walked toward the microphone, where Ethan still stood with that satisfied smirk on his face. The room remained in stunned silence, 200 guests frozen in their seats, unsure whether they had actually heard what they thought they heard. I sat at the head table, feeling like I might physically collapse. The humiliation was so complete, so public, that I couldn't even process it fully. Alexander's arm was around my shoulders, and I could feel the tension radiating from his body as he struggled to control his anger. Around us, the wedding party looked stricken. My bridesmaids had tears in their eyes, while Alexander's groomsmen appeared ready to physically remove Ethan from the premises. But Vivian looked nothing like the rest of them. As she approached the microphone, her expression was calm, determined, and strangely peaceful, as if a weight she had been carrying for years was finally about to be lifted. Ethan saw her coming and stepped aside reluctantly, perhaps assuming she was going to try to smooth over his cruel comments with diplomatic words about family love and forgiveness. He had no idea what was about to hit him. Vivian adjusted the microphone stand and surveyed the room, allowing the silence to settle even deeper. When she spoke, her voice was clear, strong, and carrying an authority I had never heard from her before. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, her tone perfectly polite but with an underlying steel that made him shift uncomfortably. "That was illuminating." She turned to face the assembled guests, her posture straight and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for what you just witnessed. No one should have their wedding reception disrupted by such cruelty, especially not someone as kind and deserving as Izzy." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several people nodded, and I saw Alexander's mother wipe tears from her eyes. "But since Ethan has chosen to make Izzy's adoption status a public topic on her wedding day," Vivian continued, her voice growing stronger, "I think it's time everyone knew the whole truth about that adoption." My heart stopped. What truth? What was Vivian talking about? "You see," Vivian said, looking directly at Ethan, whose smirk was finally beginning to fade, "I've spent the last 10 years researching Izzy's background. Not because I was curious, but because I knew something wasn't right about the story the Romano family had been telling." She reached into her small evening purse and pulled out a folded document, holding it up so everyone could see. "This is the original adoption record from the Tennessee Children's Home, obtained through proper legal channels. And what it reveals is quite different from what Izzy has been led to believe her entire life." The room was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. David and Patricia had gone pale, and I noticed them exchanging panicked glances. "The truth is," Vivian announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom, "Izzy wasn't abandoned by parents who couldn't care for her. She wasn't given up because she was unwanted." She paused, letting the tension build, her eyes finding mine across the room. "Izzy was taken from a loving family under false pretenses when she was 5 years old." Gasps erupted throughout the room. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. What was she saying? Vivian continued relentlessly. "The adoption records show that Izzy's biological mother was a young woman named Maria Santos who was struggling financially but desperate to keep her daughter. She had placed Izzy in temporary foster care with the Romano family while she worked 2 jobs trying to save enough money to provide a stable home. But instead of supporting Maria's efforts to reunite with her daughter, the Romano family manipulated the system. They used their connections and financial resources to have Maria declared an unfit mother
despite evidence to the contrary, and they pushed through an adoption that Maria fought against until the day she died. The silence in the room was deafening. I could see people looking back and forth between Vivian, my parents, and me, trying to process this information. The truth is, Maria Santos died 3 years after losing custody of her daughter. She died heartbroken, never understanding how the legal system could take away a child from a mother who loved her desperately.
Patricia stood up suddenly from her table. "This is outrageous," she shouted. "You have no right to—" "I have every right," Vivian cut her off sharply, "because Maria Santos was my aunt." The words exploded through the room like a bomb. I felt Alexander's arm tighten around me as my legs gave way completely. "That's right," Vivian said, looking directly at me with tears streaming down her face. "Izzy, you're not just my best friend. You're my cousin. Maria Santos was my mother's sister, and we have been looking for you for over 20 years. I couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't process what I was hearing. Everything I had ever believed about my identity, my family, my past, all of it was crashing down around me. When I met you at Vanderbilt," Vivian continued, her voice breaking with emotion, "I wasn't sure at first, but the dates matched, the adoption agency matched, and when you told me your birth name had been Isabella Santos before the Romano family changed it to Isabelle Romano, I knew." She wiped tears from her eyes but kept speaking. "I spent years building our friendship, years documenting how this family treated you, years watching them dismiss your achievements while celebrating mediocrity from their biological son. I watched them make you feel grateful for scraps of affection while they lavished unconditional love on someone who clearly didn't deserve it." Ethan had gone completely white. David and Patricia looked like they were about to be sick. "The private investigator I hired found Maria's journals," Vivian said, pulling out another document. Page after page of a heartbroken mother writing about how much she loved her little Isabella, how she was working day and night to bring her home, how she couldn't understand why the people who were supposed to be helping her were fighting against her instead. She looked directly at David and Patricia. "You knew," she said simply. "You knew Maria Santos was fighting to get her daughter back, and you used your money and connections to make sure she couldn't. You stole a child from a loving mother, and then spent 23 years making that child feel like she should be grateful for your conditional love." The room erupted in shocked conversation. Some guests were openly crying, others looked angry and disgusted. Alexander's father, Judge Hayes, was staring at the Romano family with the kind of expression he typically reserved for criminals in his courtroom. But I could only stare at Vivian, my best friend, my maid of honor, my cousin, as the truth of my entire life rearranged itself around me. "Izzy," Vivian said softly, her voice barely audible through the microphone, "your mother loved you so much. She never stopped fighting for you. And your real family, we never stopped looking for you." The woman I had known as my best friend reached into her purse one more time and pulled out a small photograph, holding it up so I could see it from the head table. She said, "This is you and your mother, taken just before you went into foster care. Look at her face, Izzy. Look at how much she loved you." Even from across the room, I could see it. A young woman who looked remarkably like me, holding a little girl with dark curls and the biggest smile imaginable. The love in that photo was radiant, unmistakable, and nothing like the conditional affection I had grown up receiving from the people who claimed to be my family. As the implications of everything Vivian had revealed began to sink in, I realized that my entire life had been built on a lie, and the woman standing at that microphone was the first person who had ever told me the complete truth about who I really was. The ballroom at Silverbrook Estate had transformed from a wedding celebration into something resembling a courtroom, with 200 guests serving as jury to the most devastating family secret imaginable. I sat frozen at the head table, my wedding dress suddenly feeling like a costume, my new marriage overshadowed by the revelation that everything I had ever believed about my identity was a lie. Alexander's hand found mine, squeezing tightly as he whispered, "I'm here. Whatever this means,
We're going to figure it out together." But I could barely hear him over the roaring in my head as I tried to process what Vivian had just revealed. My best friend, my maid of honor, was actually my cousin. The woman I had called mother for 23 years had stolen me from my real mother, and the man I had called father had used his connections to manipulate the legal system to keep a heartbroken woman from her daughter. David Romano finally found his voice and stood up from his table, his face flushed with anger and panic. "This is preposterous," he shouted across the room. "Vivian, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but these accusations are completely false." Vivian turned to face him calmly, still holding the microphone with steady hands. "Mr. Romano, I have documented evidence. Court records, correspondence between lawyers, financial records showing payments made to expedite the adoption process, and most damning of all, a letter from Maria Santos begging the court to let her have more time to prove she could provide for her daughter." She reached into her purse again and pulled out more documents. "I also have testimony from social workers who were involved in the case, several of whom have come forward to admit they were pressured to file negative reports about Maria's fitness as a mother." Patricia stood up next to David, her elegant composure finally cracking. "You have no idea what that woman was like. She was young, unmarried, working multiple jobs. She couldn't provide stability. She was working multiple jobs because she was trying to save money to get her daughter back. And she was 22 years old, not some irresponsible teenager. The social worker reports I found show that she had secured better housing, had a stable work schedule, and had enrolled in parenting classes. She was doing everything the court asked of her." Judge Hayes, Alexander's father, had been listening with the focused attention he brought to his courtroom. Now he spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "These are serious allegations," he said, looking directly at David. "If what Miss Clarke is saying is true, this represents fraud, corruption of the legal system, and child trafficking." David's face went from red to pale at the word trafficking. "Now wait just a minute." "No, you wait," interrupted Vivian, her composure finally giving way to years of suppressed anger. "Do you have any idea what you did to Maria? Do you understand that you destroyed a woman's life for your own selfish desires?" She turned to address the room again, her voice breaking with emotion. "Maria Santos kept every letter she wrote to her daughter over the 3 years after the adoption. Letters she couldn't send because the Romano family had moved and changed Izzy's name. Letters where she talked about working extra shifts to save money for a lawyer, about going to church every day to pray for her daughter's safety, about believing that somehow, someday, they would be reunited." Tears were streaming down Vivian's face now, but her voice remained strong. She saved every penny she could, hoping to hire a private investigator to find her daughter. She kept Izzy's room exactly as it was when she went into foster care, with all her toys and clothes, waiting for her to come home. And when she got sick, when the stress and heartbreak literally destroyed her health, she spent her last days writing letters to a daughter she would never see again. I could hear people crying throughout the room. Even some of the catering staff had stopped what they were doing to listen, tears in their eyes. Ethan, who had been silent since Vivian's revelation began, finally spoke up. "This doesn't change anything," he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Izzy has been our sister for over 20 years. This is still her family." The laughter that escaped from Vivian was bitter and cold. "Her family? Is that what you call what you've done to her? Making her feel like she had to earn love that should have been unconditional? Dismissing her achievements while celebrating your mediocrity? Publicly humiliating her on her wedding day?" She looked around the room at all the guests who had witnessed Ethan's cruel speech. "You want to know what real family looks like?" Vivian continued. "Real family celebrates your successes. Real family supports your dreams. Real family doesn't make you feel grateful for basic human decency." She turned back to me, her expression softening. "Izzy, your biological family has been looking for you since the day you disappeared. When my mother, Maria's sister, finally tracked down what happened, she spent years trying to find you. We hired investigators, we searched public records. We never gave up hope. My voice was barely a whisper when I finally managed to speak. Why, why didn't you tell me when we first met at college? Vivian's expression was full of pain and regret. Because I was 18 years old and scared, and I didn't know how to handle something so enormous. I knew that if I was wrong, I would destroy your life for nothing. And if I was right, I would still be destroying the only life you had ever known. She wiped tears from her eyes. So I decided to get to know you first, to be your friend, to understand who you had become, to see if you were happy with the Romano family. And what I discovered was that you weren't happy. You were surviving, excelling despite them, but you were never truly happy or accepted. Alexander squeezed my hand again. The past 10 years, he said quietly, she's been protecting you. Vivian nodded. I documented everything. Every dismissive comment, every time they celebrated Ethan's failures while ignoring your successes, every moment when they made you feel like you should be grateful for their conditional love. I knew that someday the truth would come out, and I wanted to make sure you understood that their treatment of you was never about your worth. It was about their guilt. She looked directly at David and Patricia. They knew, she said simply. They knew they had stolen you from a loving mother, and they spent 23 years trying to convince themselves and everyone else that they had rescued you from a bad situation. But deep down, they knew the truth, and that guilt poisoned every interaction they had with you. Patricia began crying then, her carefully composed facade finally crumbling completely. We thought we could give her a better life, she whispered. You thought you could give yourselves the daughter you wanted, Vivian corrected sharply. And when Izzy didn't fit your expectations, when she wasn't grateful enough or compliant enough, you punished her for it. You made her feel like she owed you something for being rescued, when the truth was that you owed her everything for the life you stole from her. The weight of everything Vivian had revealed was crushing. Every childhood memory, every moment of feeling different or unwanted, every achievement that went unrecognized, all of it suddenly made sense in the most heartbreaking way possible. But even as my world crumbled around me, I realized something profound was happening. For the first time in my life, someone was fighting for me. Someone was telling the truth about my worth, my history, my right to be loved unconditionally. And that someone wasn't just my best friend, she was my family, my real family, who had never stopped looking for me. The silence that followed Vivian's revelations felt different from the shocked quiet that had greeted Ethan's cruelty. This was a profound, processing silence. 200 people trying to absorb the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. I sat at the head table in my wedding dress, feeling like I was seeing the world with new eyes, understanding for the first time why I had never felt like I truly belonged with the Romano family. Alexander stood up beside me, his voice strong and clear as he addressed the room. I think my wife and her family need some privacy to process this information, he said, emphasizing the word wife in a way that made it clear his loyalty was unquestionably with me. If you'll excuse us, we're going to take a few minutes. But before we could leave, something unexpected happened. One by one, guests began to stand up. Not to leave, but to applaud. It started with Judge Hayes, Alexander's father, who rose from his seat and began clapping slowly, his expression one of profound respect for Vivian's courage and integrity. Helen Hayes joined him immediately, tears streaming down her face as she applauded. Then Emma, Alexander's sister. Then Marcus, his best man. Within moments, nearly everyone in the room was standing and applauding, not for the drama that had unfolded, but for the truth that had finally been told and for the love that had driven Vivian to tell it. The sound was thunderous and emotional, a recognition that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The only people not applauding were the Romano family, who sat in stunned, guilty silence. Alexander helped me to my feet, and together we walked toward Vivian, who was still standing at the microphone with tears streaming down her face. When I reached her, I didn't know what to say. How do you thank someone for giving you back your identity? How do you process learning that your best friend is actually your cousin, that she spent 10 years protecting you while carefully planning this moment? Instead of words, I simply wrapped my arms around her in the tightest hug of my life. "I'm so sorry," she whispered in my ear. "I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry you had to go through all of this alone." "You were never going to let me be alone," I whispered back, understanding finally why our friendship had always felt so deep, so instinctual. "You've been family this whole time." When we separated, Vivian reached into her purse one more time and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I was going to give this to you privately, but I think now is the right time." Inside the wrapping was a small jewelry box, and inside that was a delicate silver locket. When I opened it, I gasped. On one side was the photograph she had shown the room, me as a little girl with my biological mother, Maria Santos. On the other side was a more recent photo I recognized as one from Vivian's family gatherings, a group of women with similar features to mine all smiling warmly at the camera. "Your real family," Vivian said softly. "My mother is there, and your aunts, and your cousins. We've all been waiting to meet you." I looked at the faces in the locket, women who shared my dark hair, my olive skin, my facial structure, women who looked like me in a way the Romano family never had. For the first time in my life, I was seeing where I actually came from. "They're going to love you so much," Vivian continued. "They've been planning for this day for years. My mother kept every newspaper clipping about your achievements that she could find. When you graduated valedictorian, when you got your job at Creative Minds, when you got engaged, she saved everything." Alexander, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Does this mean our wedding is ruined? Because I have to say, I'm still pretty happy to be married to you, regardless of what your last name was before today." His words broke through some of the emotional overwhelm I was feeling, reminding me that yes, this was still my wedding day. Yes, my entire understanding of my family had just been revolutionized, but I was also married to the most wonderful man I had ever met, and that hadn't changed. I turned to look at the room full of guests, many of whom were still wiping tears from their eyes. "I want to apologize to everyone for the drama that interrupted what was supposed to be a celebration," I said, and Vivian handed me the microphone. "But I also want to thank you for witnessing something that needed to happen. For 23 years, I felt like I didn't quite belong anywhere. Today, I learned that I do belong, just not where I thought I did." I looked at the Romano family table, where David, Patricia, and Ethan sat in various stages of shock and shame.
"I don't hate you," I said, speaking directly to them. "I can't imagine the guilt you've been carrying all these years, knowing what you did to Maria Santos. But I also can't pretend anymore that the way you treated me was acceptable. You let your guilt poison your relationship with me, and that's something you'll have to live with." Patricia stood up, tears streaming down her face. Isabella, we did love you. We do love you." "I know you do," I replied, and I meant it. "But your love was always conditional on my gratitude, on my performance, on my willingness to be less than I was so that Ethan could shine brighter. That's not how families are supposed to work." I turned to address the room again. "But tonight isn't about the past, it's about the future. It's about the family I'm marrying into, the family I've found in my friends, and the family I'm just beginning to discover through Vivian." Alexander took my hand. "So what do you say we have a wedding reception? We've got great food, amazing music, and a room full of people who love you. The real you." The rest of the evening was unlike any wedding reception I could have imagined. Instead of the formal, traditional celebration we had planned, it became something much more meaningful, a gathering of people who genuinely cared about us, who had witnessed something profound, and who wanted to celebrate not just our marriage, but the truth that had finally been revealed. The Romano family left quietly about an hour after Vivian's revelation,
but their departure actually improved the atmosphere rather than dampening it. Without the underlying tension they had always brought to family gatherings, I felt free to be completely myself for the first time. Vivian and I spent much of the evening talking with guests who approached to express their support and admiration. Several people mentioned that they had always sensed something was off about the family dynamics they had observed, but hadn't known how to address it. "You deserved so much better," said one of my colleagues from Creative Minds. "But look what you've accomplished despite everything they put you through. You're incredible." As the evening wound down and Alexander and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon, Vivian pulled me aside one more time. "There's something else," she said, reaching into her purse yet again. "Before Maria died, she wrote you a letter. She made me promise to give it to you when I found you." The envelope was worn and yellowed, addressed in careful handwriting to "My beautiful Isabella." I opened it with trembling hands and read the words that my biological mother had written to me 20 years earlier. "My darling daughter, if you are reading this, it means someone has finally told you the truth about who you are and where you came from. I want you to know that every single day since they took you from me, I have loved you with my whole heart. I have thought about you every morning when I wake up and every night before I go to sleep. You are the most precious thing that ever happened to me, and I am so proud of the strong, smart, beautiful woman I know you have become. I hope that someday you will understand that I never stopped fighting for you, and I never stopped believing that love would find a way to bring us back together. Even though I cannot be with you now, I am with you always. Love, your mama." Reading those words, I finally understood what unconditional love actually looked like. Not the performance-based affection I had received from the Romano family, but the pure, unwavering love of a mother who never stopped believing in her daughter. As Alexander and I drove away from Silverbrook Estate towards our new life together, I realized that what had started as the most humiliating experience of my life had actually become the most liberating. For the first time ever, I knew who I really was, where I really came from, and what I was truly worth. And tomorrow, Vivian was going to introduce me to the family who had been waiting 23 years to welcome me home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.